Good afternoon and good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. My name is Kelly Joseph, and thank you all for being here with us today. So I'll be moderating our discussion, and I'm proud to be here representing WeCiE in collaboration with the Arab Institute for Women. And I want to give a big thank you to all of our panelists who you see here, and to all the participants listening in as well. So we'd like to start by saying that in the future, with webinars and panels that we're hosting, we're working to make them as accessible as possible, both with language as well as with hearing impairment, along with additional accessibility measures. And we'd like to extend a big thank you to Yari Spalding, who is providing French to English interpretation today. So thank you for that. You're going to see a function which will be shared in the chat as well. For when our panelists are speaking in French, you can have the interpretation into English. So that'll be there for you to utilize.
And we really want to fully recognize that the topic that we're going to talk about today is a heavy one. And if there's anyone listening in or on the panel that would like to talk or get support from WeCiE or the WeCiE team about experiences or navigating these experiences, feel free to reach out to us. We have an email that you can use that's confidential support at voiceamplified.org, and that will be put into the chat. So we are here today to discuss women's experience in the world of humanitarian aid and calling attention to the neocolonial ways in which aid is delivered. We want to provide a space for women to share their experiences.
We had this open-ended question that was posted in a Facebook group for women in the aid sector, asking about the challenges women faced while working in these humanitarian settings, and the responses were completely overwhelming. So following this, a group of women decided to collect this data in a more systematic and strategic way. And so there was a survey drafted, it was passed around through social media again, and within 5 days, there were over 600 respondents. And this survey brought to light things that many of us know all too well to be true. It's that this humanitarian system is often racist, it's distinctly non-feminist, and anti-women. So today we were centering this conversation around these issues and of course how we envision the future, and how this new world with a feminist approach to delivering humanitarian aid and focusing on the safety and security of these women who are delivering the aid. So with that, let's take a few moments to meet our panelists. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Lina AbiRafeh, and she is with the Arab Institute for Women. Welcome, Lina. Lina is the executive director of the Arab Institute for Women. The Institute was established in 1973 as the first women's institute in the Arab region and one of the first globally. She brings a strong feminist activist orientation to this institute and promoting education and research to advance both social and policy change, and ultimately to improve the lives of women and girls across the Arab region. Prior, Lina spent over 20 years in the development and humanitarian settings. Thank you for being here. Next, I would like to introduce to you Dr. Anusanthee Pillay, and she's representing today the Feminist Humanitarian Network. Anu is a gender specialist and advisor to both national and international humanitarian and development sectors, and all of her work is surrounding addressing violence against women and girls. And Anu has an extensive history of activism and academic engagement in this violence against women sector, both in South Africa and well beyond. Thank you for being here, Anu. Next, I'd like to introduce Veronique Ossohou-Kone, and she's here today representing the WeCiE group, which is Women of Color in Emergencies. So Veronique holds a master's degree in Ivorian civil law and has more than 10 years of experience on working on gender-based violence and women and girls' rights promotion. She's worked with numerous INGOs and UN agencies across multiple emergencies. She's worked on issues surrounding gender-based violence and including more recent work on the protection from sexual exploitation and abuse, and specifically on sexual harassment mitigation measures. Thank you for being here, Veronique. Next, I'd like to introduce Harriett Oyombe, and she joins us with International Medical Corps. Harriett is a gender-based violence specialist, and she has extensive experience within international humanitarian aid and development sectors. Harriett's worked with numerous INGOs across multiple emergency contexts within Africa and the Middle East regions. And she holds a master's degree in gender and development. Thank you for being here, Harriett. Next, I would like to introduce Fatou Wurie, also here representing WeCiE. Fatou currently works at UNICEF on innovative solutions to improve the quality of humanitarian action. And she was previously the Global Coordinator for Gender and Innovations. She was the founder of the Survivor Dream Project, a feminist nonprofit for women and girls survivors of Ebola and sexual violence. She regularly speaks across university campuses and conferences on women's health and sexual and reproductive health and rights, ending violence against women and girls, and is a frequent contributor to many global publications we all know and love, and is a radio host and storyteller. And finally, I'd love to introduce Mendy Marsh of WeCiE. Mendy's the co-founder and executive director of WeCiE, an organization dedicated to elevating women and girl-led organizations and activists as respected leaders in designing and implementing solutions to eradicate the violence against them, both in their communities and within the halls of power, and drawing from their experiences and expertise. WeCiE prides itself on taking a distinctly feminist approach, applying female leadership to make the world a safer and more equitable place. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. So with that, shall we dive right in? So the first question, that we want to talk about today, because we're here to talk about the results of this survey, reflecting on how we forge forward with a new path. Really, we'd like to ground this first question in what has it been like to be, a woman working within this humanitarian aid system? And I'll turn it over to Lina to kick us off here.
Thanks, Kelly. Thank you, everyone. Let me just preface all this by saying today in the US, it's Women's Equality Day. And that's it's been established since 1973, which is as old as the Institute that I run, to commemorate the passage of the 19th Amendment that grants women the right to vote. And the reason I say this is because we still have this kind of a sense that women's equality is a day, an exception, it's tokenistic. And that's the same way that I personally have felt being a woman in the humanitarian system. You get the sense, and I started very young and it was all that I wanted to do. This was my career goal and there was no other for me. But you get the sense that you are subscribing to a cowboy culture, that this is going to be a boys' club where you are a minority, where you are an exception, where you are the token. The idea of what we call in the US locker room talk is something that is pervasive and that you just have to accept, condone, and subscribe to if you want to be a part of this kind of a culture. I know that there is a very kind of masculine, kind of tough, almost like it is a toxic masculine culture where it resembles a military in a way. You are a part of this group, you're a part of this club, and it makes it very difficult to express any diversity, any vulnerability, anything that that deviates from that norm. So you're signing away a lot of your freedoms in some way when you're a woman in this kind of an environment, and you know that you're always going to be a minority, and that things that you say and do are going to be scrutinized and judged, and your actions are going to reflect on all women in the field. So if you somehow fail or fall short or express any weakness or have any needs or concerns or security issues that anybody, male or female, would have, all of a sudden it's all women can't do it, or all women should be here, or all women can't take it. So you carry this burden as well, that you are the embodiment of all women in this field. So you want to be tough and you want to make sure that you don't mess it up for everybody else. So those are the kinds of things that I find for me has been characteristic of my experience, at least entering this field. And I can tell you, as part of the study we did 1 year ago that Mendy talked about, within 24 hours of posting what seemed to be a pretty simple question for Humanitarian Day, and was supposed to honor female humanitarians, again, as the exception, so in a way that continues to be tokenistic, comments and concerns and people wanting to share all of their issues and fears and things that we just didn't expect. It just scratched the surface. And I know there's a lot of other people who have tons of stories, but just to say, this is an issue that has been silent for too long and is long overdue, and finally we're bringing it to light. And I hope this is just the beginning of a very long fight.
Thank you for that, Lina. And I'd love to turn it over to Harriett.
Thank you, Kelly. I would like to echo Lina's sentiments and talk about, for me, I look at it in two ways. The good side, where we are given the platform, or in the platform where we represent women, right? So as women who are empowered, who can sit in spaces where other women cannot sit in, we sit in. So I sit in those spaces where I can speak for other women, or I can speak on behalf of the most vulnerable women. Given my career, I'm working in the GBV field, women and empowerment programming. So I can actually sit in this space. I can actually speak for women who cannot speak for themselves. But on the other side, the boys' clubs, or rather the humanitarian field is still very male-dominated. We still have the patriarchal systems embedded within the humanitarian aid. When you look at the leadership of the humanitarian aid work, we have men on top of the hierarchy. And so, like Lina, I constantly feel like I have to fight to be on the table where men are. I will constantly be looked at as the woman who is the weaker sex. If I get to a conference or a room and people want coffee, they will look at me and they would ask me to get them coffee just because I'm a woman. So I feel like being in the humanitarian field is both empowering and a struggle to fight for equality with our male counterparts.
Thank you for sharing, Harriett. Really appreciate that. And I'd love to call in Fatou to join the conversation.
Hello, everyone. Morning, afternoon, evening. Thanks for kicking us off. I think just to carry the thought that Harriett started around representation, my journey into the humanitarian sector has been one about representation and its importance, as well as the opportunity to interrogate. So representation and interrogation. I didn't choose this field. I think it chose me. It was very much an organic growth in my career or in my activism and who I thought and who I think I am and what I want to do. I grew up in the global South. My parents worked in the humanitarian sector for a long time. And so growing up at a very young age and all the way through my formative years, I was constantly being asked and questioning what we mean by the field, right? I was living in the field for all purposes. So whatever the media was presenting, whatever crisis was happening, in my own capacity as a young person, I would work and would stand up and work with my colleagues and my friends and my schoolmates and would act in my own capacity, and quickly learned that in the field, the global South, people, regardless of whether we get support or not, or whether, aid, whatever form aid comes in, and oftentimes it's delayed or it comes with its own conditionalities, people on the ground in these realities, in their full humanity, are responding. We have to. We're a touch point away from poverty. We're a touch point away from these realities. And oftentimes it was our communities, regardless of where we found ourselves and on a socioeconomic status, that were affected. So I quickly had to learn about how we think about the field, the power dynamics around that, and the lens in which we think about humanitarian sector and the humanitarian work and emergencies, really from a very colonial, male, Western Eurocentric perspective. And everything I used to see on TV, because, you know, we had access to CNN and BBC and things like that, and I'm living in it, whether it was the bombing that happened in Sudan, the tsunami and the earthquake that happened in Pakistan and East Asia at that time, or the fact that, you know, I was evacuated twice, 9/11 and also during the Iraq War. I'm sitting here and I'm like, what am I seeing in the TV and what am I seeing in realities? And so it's been a natural projection to come and interrogate how we think about the field and how we think about power. When it comes to representation, I think Harriett, that was such an important point that she made. Part of this journey, this natural journey as a Black African a woman, and also Muslim, not visibly Muslim, but Muslim woman, it was so important to me. I don't claim to represent the voices of people. I am one voice. I'm one person that is also has my own conditioning. But it's definitely about being able to, for me, representation was important in terms of, especially in Africa, it was important that I'm a part of a set of African expertise that is there to bridge the gap, so that when we are working in our communities, our people see us. They see me, that you can be young and you can be a woman and you can serve in this capacity. It makes all the difference. And the power dynamics for me are beyond sort of the structural colonial discourse and way in which we think about the field. When we think about representation, it wasn't just a male-female sort of dichotomy in terms of how we begin to explore issues around gender equality. It was really about race as well. Oftentimes, if we're thinking about within women in humanitarian sector, it is usually white women that show up. And once again, when we think about representation, I wanted to say a woman of color, a Black woman for the continent of Africa, or places where people present as Black can also be part of this process. So I'll stop here and yeah, super important question. Over.
Thank you, Fatou, and I really appreciate you lifting up the neocolonial language and design of the system, even in using the term the field and what that means. So really appreciate you lifting that. And Mendy, I'd love to call for you to respond to this first question.
Sure, thanks, Kelly, and thanks everyone for jumping in and sharing so boldly. It's so powerful. And you know, like many of you, not the same experience. My experience has been unique, as all of yours have, but I would say mine has been equally shocking in many ways. I've worked in some really well-known, large and international NGOs, and as a consultant, as a staff member, I've also worked in some very large UN entities, right? I've had to lock myself in rooms at night to the best of my ability to keep myself as safe as I could from male colleagues around me. I've had direct supervisors who have undermined me through sexual harassment in the field and in headquarters. I'm quite sure that these tactics have actually been used against me to explicitly undermine me and my efforts professionally because of the work that I do. Because the work that I do is addressing violence against women and girls, like everyone on the panel. And it's the work I'm going to do forever. I've had my family threatened when people have not appreciated my persistence to speak up about how the aid system must stop putting women and girls at risk. I've been tasked and trusted to support programs to address violence against women and girls all over the world by an organization that refused to listen to me when I've challenged the in-house disregard and acknowledgement of how there are perpetrators among us, and how individuals engage in humanitarian work so that they can actually manipulate their positions of power over the people that they serve. And I've tried again and again to help so many women try to pursue avenues of justice within large organizations that tout this zero tolerance when it comes to preventing sexual exploitation and abuse against the people that they serve, while refusing to acknowledge that if they cannot protect the women who work within their own homes and houses from the males that they work with, that something is deeply wrong. And the agencies that claim to have this zero tolerance perspective or policy, for the most part, seem very ill prepared to act on that zero tolerance. And in fact, they may actually blame the people who are making the complaints when we do step up and stand out against the violence.
Thank you, Mendy, and thank you to everyone for responding to that question. I know all of these questions can be deeply personal, but that one in particular. So moving along, sharing something specific from the survey, it was mentioned by many of the respondents that these working environments are hostile, they're unsafe for women, and it's important to add, it's not because we work in emergency settings, it's because the issues are coming from inside the house. And so the question is, what would make things safer for women working in the humanitarian field? And, feel free to reflect upon personal experiences as you feel comfortable to share. And I'd love to call on Veronique to kick us off. And remember the interpretation function if you'd like to listen in English.
Merci Kelly. Je ne sais pas si c'est bon avec Ira, c'est bon pour l'interprétation? OK. Donc, merci pour la question. Je pense que je vais donc mettre à crédit tous les mots de remerciement que mes prédécesseurs ont déjà adressés donc à Voice pour cette opportunité qui nous est donnée de partager notre expérience, de partager un petit pan de notre expérience parce qu'en 1h30, on ne pourra pas toucher tous les sujets. Cette question-là est une question pour moi essentielle et je voudrais quand même la voir peut-être sur 3 angles. Le premier aspect, c'est de dire que la dangerosité donc, du contexte dans lequel nous travaillons vient du fait que le contexte humanitaire est une continuité donc, de notre vie. Ce n'est pas parce qu'on est dans un contexte humanitaire qu'on est dans un système qui est contrairement en dehors de la communauté de façon globale dans laquelle nous vivons. Donc, à l'extérieur déjà, la femme est déjà exposée à une forme de dangerosité vu le fait que nous travaillons généralement dans des contextes qui sont liés à soit à comme on dit, une déliquescence donc, du système de protection qui est déjà mis en place pour toute la population. Donc, s'il y a une guerre, s'il y a un conflit, s'il y a une catastrophe naturelle, le système social de protection de toutes les composantes de la communauté est déjà ébranlé. Donc, chacun cherche à se protéger. Donc, en déployant des femmes sur ce terrain-là, sans prendre des mesures spécifiques liées à la protection des femmes, c'est déjà aussi les jeter, comme on dit, dans la gueule du loup. Et voilà, donc pour l'aspect intérieur, il y a aussi le fait que, généralement, comme les autres l'ont dit déjà, le contexte humanitaire, comme c'est un club, c'est un club d'hommes. Les hommes se disent, on est dans notre serre, on boit notre whisky ensemble, on fume des cigares et on dénigre même de temps en temps les femmes. Donc, introduire une femme dedans, c'est leur rappeler qu'ils doivent tenir compte de la présence de la femme dans tout leur agir, dans tout leur dire et dans tout leur comportement. Ce qui vient les mettre dans une position d'inconfortable. Et lorsque vous regardez, par exemple, la question du harcèlement sexuel dans le système humanitaire, mais le harcèlement sexuel ne vient pas de l'extérieur. Ça vient de l'intérieur, du fait que ces hommes-là se disent, puisque nous sommes dans un club d'amis, c'est comme nous sommes dans un pub. Nous sommes dans un pub, nous sommes dans un club, nous sommes dans un nightclub, mais évidemment qu'il y a des travailleuses du sexe qui gravitent autour de nous. Donc, nos collègues femmes représentent celles sur qui nous pouvons toujours continuer un peu ce que la communauté, la société nous donne en termes de droits sur les femmes. Donc, on a eu des expériences. Moi, particulièrement, j'ai eu des expériences où j'ai été harcelée par des collègues, mais le système qui est mis en place pour freiner, pour contrôler ce genre de comportement est un système qui a été rédigé par les hommes. Il a été rédigé par les hommes sans tenir compte des besoins spécifiques des femmes. J'ai vu des femmes, moi j'ai connu des femmes qui ont démissionné parce qu'elles étaient harcelées, parce que tout simplement le système, elles ne croyaient pas au système, parce que le système était l'idée, le système de contrôle était l'idée par un autre homme. Donc la solidarité masculine, évidemment. Donc à partir de ce moment-là, mais évidemment que ce contexte humanitaire-là devient difficile parce que, comme les autres l'ont dit, on est censé être forte, on est censé être des femmes fortes, celles qui ne pleurent pas, celles qui ne réchignent pas à la tâche. Et comme on est celles qui portent la voix des autres femmes, on est obligé de travailler 2 fois plus que les hommes pour justifier notre présence dans ce club d'hommes. mais c'est une pression qui affecte la santé mentale et physique des femmes qui sont sur le terrain. Donc moi, quand je regarde tous ces éléments-là, ces éléments de dangerosité-là sont tellement extrêmes que je me dis comment est-ce qu'on peut contrecarrer cela? Mais il faut commencer d'abord par revoir nos politiques au niveau de chaque organisation humanitaire. Et quand je dis revoir nos politiques, c'est vraiment confronter cette politique en tenant compte des opinions et des avis des femmes, pas seulement des hommes. Et dans les femmes, il faut aller regarder dans la catégorisation des femmes, les femmes qui ont des enfants, des femmes qui ont une orientation sexuelle qui sont différentes, des femmes qui ont une religion différente, des femmes qui vivent avec, par exemple, un handicap, que ce soit sensoriel ou physique, pour nous assurer que les mesures de protection que nous mettons en place avant de déployer les femmes répondent effectivement à tous ces aspects-là. Et que dans le système de leadership, les femmes soient représentées. Moi, je me rappelle dans une de mes expériences, on a envoyé quelqu'un pour venir prendre l'intérim du chef de base parce que selon l'organisation, c'était la plus grande base de cette mission-là dans ce pays. Et cette personne qui est venue, qui devait censée prendre cette position, cette personne venait d'arriver à une semaine seulement dans l'organisation, alors que moi, j'avais 6 mois d'ancienneté dans cette organisation. Et les gens ont dit non, c'est la dame, elle a toujours fait l'intérim, ici ça s'est toujours bien passé, malgré la pression, elle tient le coup, on lui accorde l'intérim. Mais c'est de l'intérieur que les gens m'ont combattu. Il a fallu qu'une autre femme, la country director de l'époque, sorte un document pour dire, jusqu'à ce que le siège recrute quelqu'un d'autre, c'est Veronique Ossohou qui est le chef de base. Mais je vous épargne ce que par quoi je suis passé. J'ai failli arriver à la dépression, au point où je disais, si je meurs ici d'une crise cardiaque ou d'un AVC, mais c'est eux qui m'auraient tué, parce que la pression était tellement forte. La pression des autres hommes, il y avait un groupe d'hommes qui étaient contre ça. Jusqu'à ce que finalement le siège attende mon cri de cœur et qu'on nous envoie quelqu'un pour pouvoir démanteler, si on veut voir ce réseau-là. Donc, pour moi, les politiques doivent être refléter la réalité. La femme n'est pas un être vulnérable. Je déteste ce mot-là lorsqu'on dit les femmes sont vulnérables. La vulnérabilité, moi je suis aujourd'hui peut-être une femme forte devant vous, mais ma vulnérabilité va dépendre du contexte dans lequel je suis. Et pour, comme on dit, réduire ce système-là, il va y avoir vraiment des politiques qui traitent de ces questions-là, des politiques qui tiennent compte vraiment de ce que les femmes peuvent faire, de ce que les femmes ne peuvent pas faire, de la particularité des tâches de la femme, de savoir que les femmes peuvent être enceintes. Et que si je suis enceinte, évidemment, je ne pourrais pas être à 100% parce que je porte un autre aile et que j'ai besoin d'une certaine forme de protection avant de me balancer sur le terrain. Regardez les véhicules que nous achetons. Nous avons des hard-top. Je suis enceinte de 5 mois. Il faut prendre les hard-top. Tout ça, je l'ai vécu. Vous prenez le hard-top toute la journée. Quand vous arrivez, vous êtes complètement lessivé physiquement et psychologiquement. Mais parce que devant les autres, vous devez montrer qu'en tant que femme, vous n'êtes pas un être faible, vous êtes capable d'être à 100%, mais vous ignorez toute la souffrance physique et morale que vous avez. Donc, voilà un peu ce que je peux dire sur cette question-là pour dire qu'on peut passer toute la journée là-dessus et que pour moi, la meilleure solution, réviser les politiques, nous assurer qu'au niveau du leadership, les femmes sont représentées et que la solidarité féminine soit de mise et que les femmes comprennent qu'on n'est pas, on est en bataille avec, je dis bataille entre griffes, ce n'est pas un combat frontal, mais on est en bataille pour gagner de l'espace pour notre représentativité et qu'on doit pouvoir se soutenir mutuellement entre nos femmes d'abord.
Veronique, thank you. There was so much there, but I really loved this term masculine solidarity in relation to this boys club. And, your point on women's vulnerability and not wanting to say that we're vulnerable, it's, and this whole system just wasn't built, with us in mind. Thank you so much for sharing. And just for, I know we've shared it in the chat, but for the audience, when you're clicking for the interpretation in English, you can also mute the original audio. Thank you, Veronique. And I'd love to turn it over to Harriett to respond to the question.
Yeah, so probably just to add to what Veronique has said, first of all, for us to talk about safer environments, we have to define what hostile environments are. So what is hostility in the humanitarian aid work as a woman? A hostile environment is where we have dismissive behaviors from our male colleagues, where the system is so patriarchal and it's male-dominated, and the leadership is sort of centralized around the boys' clubs. And when women would want to report, there's a lot of backlash, there's a lot of retaliation. And so there's a lot of intimidation for the women by the men within the humanitarian aid work. That makes the environment extremely hostile. When I talk about dismissive behaviors, it's like when you have a suggestion or when you go to a meeting and you are a female colleague, you are with your male counterparts, they will speak, converse, and then they will put you as an and, like, and what do you have to say? Then after 2 minutes, they're like, oh, okay, the meeting is closed, and they leave. And the perception that our male counterparts have on us as the weaker sex makes the environment very hostile. I mean, when we have women not allowed to take maternity leave, for example, they are not allowed to, because men would never understand the process of nurturing the family, which is a burden that is completely given to the woman to take care of the family and yet come back and work. And then when assertiveness is translated to aggression, that when you speak your mind, they call you an aggressive woman, you're labeled, you're called names. And when you don't fit in the social circle systems of men, they taunt you, they humiliate you, they emotionally abuse you. And the worst part of this is, I mean, additionally, we have some of our female colleagues who really support this, or who are sympathizers to the boys' club. But the worst part is most humanitarian aid workers who are women, they suffer in silence. Why? Because the system protects the man. So how can we make the environment more safer? So I would say we need to have functional reporting mechanisms. We have the reporting systems, we have the reporting mechanisms. But when you look at the people who man mostly these reporting systems, or where people are supposed to report their men, if you look at the people who we are supposed to go to and report to when we are facing harassment, whether it's sexual, whether it's verbal, whether it's emotional, you'll find men, and they will always take the side of the men. They will dismiss what you're saying. Some of them would say, your behavior is one thing, and they would ask the questions that really is annoying and irritating, like, what did you do? How did you behave? Women are not supposed to behave that way. Why are you aggressive? Why are you back answering the man? We need policies, to create policies, to have policies and systems that hold people accountable. So if there's a country director, for example, who is supporting I will call them perpetrators, or men, or enabling behaviors that are very dismissive to the woman, they're supposed to be held accountable. And the people who we report as people who breached the code of conduct, who've harassed the women, they're not only supposed to be fired, they're supposed to be blacklisted, they're supposed to be apprehended, they're supposed to be brought to book. We are not supposed to allow these things to continue happening, and we keep quiet and we're not holding anyone accountable. We have systems, all organizations have systems. And it took the Oxfam scandal, if I would put it in quotes, to make all the organizations be on their toes and realize, oh my God, sexual exploitation and abuse happens. And not only to our beneficiaries, it also happens to our staff. And who are we holding accountable? Who are we making them take the responsibility of what is happening? So I believe if we have functional, where we have equal representation of both men and women, where we have equal play field for both men and women, where there's power balance, where we can listen to women as much as we listen to men, we'll have more conducive environment where women are more expressive, where they can talk about what is affecting them, and where they can serve the beneficiaries better. I think that's what I would like to contribute on this matter.
Thank you, Harriet. And finally, I'll turn it over to Lina for this question.
Yeah, I'll share a personal story. One of my early assignments in the field, I was maybe 22. I was living in a country where sexual harassment was prevalent.
Lina, for some reason we can't hear you. It looks like your mic is on.
Mic is on. Keep going.
Make sure everyone's off that your translation is off.
You can hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I'll start over. So I was sharing a personal story. When I was 22 and in the field, so quite young, in a country where sexual harassment was very prevalent, and I was experiencing it a lot on the streets. I also was experiencing it in the office at the hands of a colleague with whom I was forced to travel, take trips into the field, into our national sites, and who would harass me in the office, proposition me, and so on. So you can imagine. And finally, I said, well, this is not acceptable. Although it took me a while to get to that point, because again, there wasn't really any policy I could refer to, and I was extremely uncomfortable, also quite young, naive, and did not know the dynamics of the field. So I went to the country director and I said, here's the situation. I said, this is a person with whom I should not be traveling or alone in a vehicle or whatever, lots of unwanted touching and comments and so on. And he said to me, and I'll never forget it, oh, Lina, you know how men are. You know, he probably doesn't mean it. You know how these things are. You know how these countries are. You know how these people, what do you want me to do? You want me to bring him in and see if he's going to confess to it? He will never admit it. It will be like nailing Jello to the wall. And I said, that is an expression I have never heard and I will never forget. And I still get chills when I say it because I have never heard it since. And I've never found it. And what that means, for those who might not understand that, is it's futile. It's impossible. Oh, Lina, he'll never admit it. Just deal with it. And then he said to me, if you think this is a problem, maybe the field isn't for you. And maybe you should find a job in headquarters. And at 22, I didn't really have much field experience, nor a lot of strength to kind of counter this, nor a policy to protect me, nor anybody in so-called headquarters who would defend me. And I finished that assignment early. I really wasn't keen to stay for obvious reasons because the situation did not change. In fact, it made things worse for me by having reported it because that's not a secret. Everybody knows it, even when you try and keep it quiet. And I left thinking, maybe the field isn't for me. And I went back in the field and I spent 2 decades there, but that's not an experience that I wish on anyone. And it took a lot for me to go back into the field and say, yes, the field is for me, and I'm going to make sure it's not just for me, but that it is for other women as well. There you go. Not a happy story, but here we are.
Thank you for sharing that. I know that people listening in are in solidarity with you, have experienced other things similarly, and thank you for bravely sharing with us. So we're going to move into our third question, which is around the survey. And so 35% of our respondents felt that the humanitarian system rewards sexism and discrimination while it simultaneously hides abuses, which were all the things that were just spoken to. So with that understanding, there's also these layered discriminations within the system. And we know that women with intersecting marginalized identities, face compounding discrimination. And, so the question is, this is what came back in the survey, 35% of the respondents, would you say this is reflective of your experiences? And I'd love to call on Anu to start the conversation here.
speaking to myself. That's fine. I'm used to it. I'm always doing it. So thank you for the question, and thank you very much to Voice for the opportunity to speak on this panel. Without a doubt, that statement reflects what I certainly have experienced and what I've witnessed within this aid industry. And I'm really interested that you started off by calling it an industry. Because let's acknowledge upfront, you know, that this is aid development and humanitarian aid is de facto a northern-based industry dominated by elite northerners, all talking a lot about human rights and inequality and equality, and while benefiting professionally, financially, intellectually from the monetization of helping. In inverted commas, I may have to do that since you can't see the word. So many of us in the system, and I'm including myself here, we know we find a comfort zone to do this work and without upsetting the status quo. You know, sort of making middle-class statements from our comfortable benches and saying, you know, lots of controversial things, but in a way that doesn't really upset things. So what you are describing, what the 35% of respondents described, are symptoms of much larger overarching issues, which I would like to talk about. So I'll just give a little bit of a personal example. I mean, there are numerous examples of what you described, Kelly, and how this manifests in these systems. I can tell you over many years working in South Africa, where there's a mini global North and South here. And I experienced all of these things within my own country. And of course, in many international operations as well. So I'll just focus on one. I'll talk about a gender capacity roster that Lina knows very well, that we were both on. And when I joined this roster, there were two things that stood out for me. Right at the beginning, I couldn't believe that I was joining a gender capacity roster, gender capacity, where I could not speak about women. And I see Lina smiling because she remembers very well what this was like when we started. And so I thought that this was really incredible. And what I found was that what was happening there was a very liberal technocratic approach that was being taken to the work, very much against any feminist, anything that one can call feminist principle, values, ways of working. There was nothing feminist about it. It was liberal, technocratic, and obscured the politics of power that we were dealing with. Visible, invisible, hidden power, all kinds of power was just obscured. So I was just astounded within this system at the levels of micro and open aggression displayed towards anyone not willing to fit in. So I was quiet. I thought, let me see what happens. I won't buck the system as yet. And what I realized is that as gender advisors, we were being sent into a system that we were sent to transform. So we had to go in there and transform the system, but we were doing it being hobbled at the knees. I don't know if you know this term, being hobbled. So when you're a horse and you want to keep the horse from straying, you hobble the horse. And that's exactly how we were sent in, hobbled. So that if we wanted to keep our jobs, we had to comply with that way of working. Gender technocrat, talk about women, men, boys, and girls. You never talk about women without mentioning boys and men. So if we had to comply, and if we dared to push back, we faced losing our jobs. Some things did shift. We did push back whenever we could. And again, in solidarity with others, nobody was able to push back by themselves. And some things did shift a very little bit, but there's still the gender technocratic approach that persists. The upside to that whole thing is it gave birth to the Feminist Humanitarian Network, which I'm a part of, and to other feminist networks and spaces that exist today. In that time when we joined, Lina can attest to the fact that there were no such spaces available, and we did not dare say the F word. The other thing I noted that in this system was that the ones of us who got chosen to do the less onerous, the less dangerous, the cushy global assignments were the white, northern-based, and sometimes Australian women and men. So this speaks to this intersectional discrimination that you talk about. So, you know, it was the passport mobility of the northerners that, you know, so that many competent African Asian women were consistently overlooked, and the choices were made for those jobs were based more on who you knew in the system and how much brown nosing you were willing to do. So this is where this intersectional discrimination came in, not just because you're from the South, not just because you're a woman, not just because you're Black, or English is your third language, but also because you don't have a passport that lets you into the countries, or that limits you getting a visa, or that there are difficulties with connectivity. So many layers and layers and layers of discrimination. You're just in a no-win situation. And you can't match the expectations that our Northern colleagues can match, or sometimes are not even asked to match. Language is a good example. I know many Europeans with poor English skills who will still climb ladders, where anyone else from the South wouldn't even get onto the ladder if you don't have good English speaking skills, English language skills. So these are some of the discriminations that I just wanted to raise. But what I realized that, you know, so I raised this with the organization. And after some years, you know, saying that, look at the optics, I said, I tried to put it very diplomatically. You all know me, I'm very diplomatic.
We're losing her at just a pivotal moment. Let's give her a moment to see if she comes back in. All right, so we'll wait for Anu to come back and join us, but maybe I can hand it over to Fatou to respond.
This one is hard because Anu was just in mid-sentence, and
I know.
and she really grounded the conversation and framed it so well. I think it's so important we understand the framework, the industry that we work in, and to understand how we are constantly working to deconstruct and interrogate the many layers of power. There was something I just wanted to refer to before I, you know, engage with this question. I think someone in the Q&A made a really good point about, you know, assuming that we're taking this from an Africa or a Black perspective, which is not true. As you can see, the panel is quite diverse, and it's important when we're talking about how we think we should be dismantling power, what it means to be a woman in the humanitarian industry. But I just want to say that I just want to acknowledge that comment, because I think it's really, really true. Like, you know, Angela Davis recently said, the unholy alliance between colonialism and slavery really beckons us to have this conversation when we think about anti-Blackness in general, especially within the humanitarian industry. It's essential that we also think about Indigenous peoples in the embodiment and how they engage in this industry and in this system, and how it expresses itself, as well as anti-Latina peoples as well. So it is not just looking at, even in the anti-Black discourse, I don't just think of people of African or Black descent. I think of Indigenous communities. I think of South Asian women who present as Black. I think of other women of color as well, and the many ways our identities intersect, and what that means for our safety and our engagement in this space. I think it's really important when we're thinking about deconstructing power. Now, when it comes to this particular question, I think the survey, just 35%, I'm like, this should have been even higher. We know the myriad and the layers of discrimination, sexism, racism, ableism, ageism, linguistic discrimination that occurs, and the insidious ways in which the system is built. And patriarchy is such a powerful machine, and that is powered by, you know, that enables racism and sexism to flourish. The insidious ways in which the system is built, and it really covers and protects what it's been built for: men, whiteness, white supremacy, to thrive, period. In the discourse, in the language, and how we think about aid, and how we fund aid. So if you're walking in and you're, most of us that work around sexual violence, we know that less than 1% of all of that is budgeted within the response. So how do you even begin to negotiate when in the money, when we're tracing the money, we're not even being prioritized? Gender and localization and all these things that are coming out of these global conferences. Just thinking, let me just break down what I'm trying to say. Thinking about the experiences of Anu and Lina and that generation that have really taken the brunt, Mendy's, many other women in this space that have taken the brunt and have pushed and have been at the forefront of really ensuring that this space is safer for women. And there's a newer or a younger generation that is resting on top of that. A lot has changed. We now have feminist networks. We have women in emergency networks. More women are open, and we're sitting here having this conversation. And yet the same oppression has just been, repackaged, has been repackaged linguistically. Localization is now a big thing. Localization requires that we shift power so that it is people on the ground that matter. It is people that can represent people on the ground that matter. And that shifting is not happening. We see it in how it's funded. We see it in who people send to some of the most recent crises. We think about all the sort of, whatever happened with Oxfam, what's happened with the anti-Black movement. All of this is getting people to react. We're reacting. Very recently, 2 weeks ago, the organization I worked in was all of a sudden thinking about decolonizing the humanitarian sector as part of the humanitarian review. And I remember sitting and looking at the list of people that were at the forefront of this decolonization process. It was all white men and women who, by the way, have openly acknowledged that they do not understand anti-racist or anti-Black rhetoric. These are the people, this is the leadership, these are the thought leaders sitting down, responsible for the decolonization process. Or, like Anu was saying, they just to ensure that we appear to be equal, will perhaps bring a person of color, right, who has brown nose, who is of the institution first and foremost, to sit there and be the representative for all people of color. So how do we, so when you see this type of politicking happening in the system, and as someone working in it, I lose hope. I don't feel safe at a structural level. And then when we are working and responding in emergencies, it's even more so. I want to just sort of wrap all of these themes in a very, in my last mission that happened in December, I spent about a month and a half in the DRC for the Ebola response. And of course, I had been in the Sierra Leone response for the whole 3 years. I was confused on many levels, right? Because we knew what happened in West Africa. We were not applying those lessons to the DRC. And first of all, the DRC has had 10 Ebola cases, right? Like 10 Ebola outbreaks. So they are also quite versed. I was one of the few Anglophone Black women that came from headquarters to go and respond. And that was because a Black woman pushed for me in the system to go. When I landed, I also have to say that people were exhausted. It was December, we were coming towards the end or whatever. The entire response to date before I arrived was predominantly white, male, European, French, Belgian. And thinking about the history of the Congo, that already is incredibly problematic. I get to Goma and the leadership is white and is male. And every woman of color, especially Black women, were either of a lower level, we're absolutely not considered, we're not in decision-making processes, and we're just there to enable whatever was being said by who was represented. I don't speak French very well. I come from headquarters. I am not of a senior management level. And let me tell you, I was unsafe, relegated to the margins, silenced in every way possible, including from a white woman who said to me, your suggestion about what the youth or how we should design this program and intervention for Congolese youth, I don't agree with you. I have been in the field for 2 years. You just came here, what would you know? She's sitting there telling me that she can speak on behalf of all Congolese youth because she has been in the Congo for 2 years. And so we also have to talk about, when we think about from the gender perspective, what does solidarity look like? And so the intersectionality and the power dynamics and who gets empowered and how they're empowered. I mean, we can sit here for hours, and I know that many speakers have to go, but I do want to wrap up with this to say that for me, there is an opportunity right now, especially given where we are in COVID and what COVID has forced the world to do. Thinking about the Me Too movement, thinking about sort of the anti-Black movement that and with, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement that's come from the global north, from America, but it has global reverberations. For some reason, for the first time in a very long time, I am so hopeful that we can really begin to think about how do we interrogate from an anti-racist lens, but how do we also think about decolonizing aid, but also decolonizing the version of feminism that we think we can perpetuate and use when we think about this industry as well? How do we really, like, I'm curious, are we willing and are we ready to really do the real and difficult work in shifting power? Also.
Fatou, thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, the way you wrapped it up, I'm just thinking about your story of the co-opting of the terminology of decolonizing aid and how that's scary and unsafe. And you're absolutely right in terms of this is a moment, but it can't be done in that way. I'm looking forward to see what happens from this panel. I know we've already received questions and comments about what's next, and we will figure that out. Thank you, Fatou, and hopefully Anu can rejoin us. So moving along into the next question. This is around equal pay and benefits and protections, because these were main issues that a lot of the survey respondents shared. And specifically talking about discrepancies when it comes to, were they designated as national staff and national women? Were they designated as international staff and international women? And certainly there's often, you know, white women who are the international staff who are coming in, such as myself. And, you know, so when it comes to women working in the field, what are some of the issues that you've seen around these areas? And I want to welcome back Anu. I want to turn this over to Veronique to respond.
Thank you, Kelly. I think that I will make some pause when sometimes when I'm talking with my passion, I forget that people need to make a translation. So sorry, Sarah, for putting you in trouble. Okay. So, yes, pour cette question, la question de l'égalité des avantages sociaux, du salaire et tout ça, il est important de regarder cela sous différents aspects. Premièrement, au niveau du salaire, cette différenciation du salaire qu'il y a entre les staffs nationaux et les staffs internationaux, je parle toujours des femmes. Malheureusement, moi, j'ai été staff national avant d'être self-expatrié d'une même organisation. Et c'est vrai qu'il y a une différence de salaire, mais cette différence de salaire est basée sur la législation nationale. Vous comprenez? Et moi, je me rappelle que lorsque j'étais, par exemple, staff national, c'était l'un des combats que je menais en tant qu'activiste des droits de la femme, mais également aussi en tant que responsable du plaidoyer, qui travaillait sur les questions de discrimination salariale au niveau national. Lorsque vous avez un contrat en tant que staff national, vous avez un contrat en tant que staff national conformément à votre cadre juridique qui entoure le monde du travail dans votre pays. Donc, quand les organisations internationales arrivent, elles regardent qu'est-ce que le cadre juridique dit en matière de salaire. Et à partir de là, elles s'alignent. Quand elles font une augmentation de 20%, 30%, ben, ça contente les gens parce qu'ils se disent, ben, tiens, donc mon salaire est légèrement au-dessus de ce que la moyenne nationale gagne. Donc, il n'y a pas de combat. Donc, pour moi, ce combat à ce niveau serait déjà perdu si on veut le confronter dans le monde humanitaire en disant il faut que les staffs nationaux aient le même salaire que les staffs internationaux parce que ce n'est pas le même type de salaire, ce n'est pas le même type de contrat, pardon, de travail. Mais là où le problème va venir se poser, comme on dirait en français, là où le bas blesse, c'est au niveau des avantages sociaux. Je me rappelle que lorsque j'étais staff national, et encore, je me rappelle avoir conduit aussi ce plaidoyer-là, je me suis rendu compte que nous, en tant que staff national, on avait droit, conformément à notre législation nationale, on avait le droit de bénéficier d'un congé de maternité lorsqu'on était enceinte, qu'on devait partir accoucher, qui était de 16 semaines. Ça, c'est au niveau de la Côte d'Ivoire. Et j'étais surprise de voir que les staff expatriés, lorsqu'elles tombaient enceintes, au bout de 7 mois, ben, elles démissionnaient. Je n'avais pas compris au début. Et donc, je suis allée vers ma coordonnatrice du département VBG, qui était aussi expatriée, et je lui ai demandé, mais je ne comprends pas, c'est quoi le problème? Elle me dit, puisque nous sommes une organisation qui est arrimée au cadre légal américain, et que là-bas, il n'y a pas de congé de maternité, c'est des congés de maladie. Donc, on prend ça sur nos congés de maladie, et puis après, on prend ça vraiment, oui, tu vas sans être payé et tout ça. Et j'ai dit, c'est pas vrai. C'est pas possible. On ne peut pas avoir une organisation qui dit, nous faisons la promotion des droits de la femme et des droits de la femme. Nous venons donner un message au niveau national aux gens de respecter les droits de la femme. Et nous utilisons, comme on dit, une tâche naturelle dévolue à la femme qui est la maternité pour la discriminer. Et je disais, mais... Et j'étais surpris, je dis, mais dans ce cas, où sont les papas? Qu'est-ce que les papas subissent? Parce qu'ils ne subiront rien. Ils vont avoir toujours leur continuité dans leur vie professionnelle. Ça ne va pas avoir d'impact. Pendant ce temps, la femme, lorsqu'elle tombe enceinte, mais ça, pour les femmes, c'est un souci. Et j'ai dit non. Et au fur et à mesure que les choses ont avancé, je pense qu'avec d'autres pays aussi qui ont commencé à se mêler dedans, finalement, cette organisation a mis en place une politique de maternity leave, de congé de maternité, tant pour les staffs femmes que pour les staffs hommes. Et aujourd'hui, c'est alléluia, comme on dit. Et je vais dans une autre organisation, mais le même problème se pose. Et le même problème se pose même aux staffs nationaux. Pourquoi? Parce qu'on déployait les staffs nationaux sur le terrain, même dans le pays, on les déployait sur les staffs, les fields, comme on dit, les positions dans les différents sites d'intervention. Et lorsque ces personnes, après, elles accouchent, mais elles arrêtaient leur contrat. Elles étaient obligées de démissionner. On mettait fin à leur contrat. Pourquoi? Parce que l'organisation disait qu'on ne pouvait pas prendre en charge la femme et l'enfant. Et je demandais, qu'est-ce que vous offrez à l'enfant? Juste payer la place de l'avion pour déployer la personne? C'est juste ça? Oui, on ne peut pas. Et j'ai dit, mais c'est une aberration. Nous sommes au 21e siècle. Nous sommes au 21e siècle. Et ça, je n'ai pas compris. Et plus tard, moi-même, je l'ai subi. Parce que quand tu es enceinte, déjà, tu planifies comment est-ce que tu vas démissionner au bout de 7 mois. Parce qu'on ne peut pas t'aider. Pour moi, et c'est ça. Les avantages sociaux, c'est l'un des avantages sociaux essentiels pour la femme. Surtout si j'ai envie de donner naissance à un enfant. Mais ça veut dire qu'arrive un moment, si je suis une passionnée du travail humanitaire, je vais être obligée d'arrêter ma carrière parce que j'ai un choix difficile à faire entre soit être mère ou soit être travailleur humanitaire. Et ça, malheureusement, ça existe encore jusqu'à présent dans certaines organisations, alors que nous sommes toujours en train de dire, oui, Women's Center, la poche, on fait des choses pour les femmes, on avance les choses, on fait ceci. Donc, pour moi, là, tous ces avantages-là doivent regarder ces choses-là. Vous comprenez? Et évidemment que certainement que ça va avoir un impact aussi sur les salaires, sur tout ce qui va arriver. Et l'impact de cela dans la carrière de la femme humanitaire, c'est qu'évidemment, quand on va avoir à nommer quelqu'un, on va regarder, ah, ça c'est Véronique, ben ça c'est Joseph. Ben Joseph, lui, ne va pas aller en congé de maternité. Or, Véronique pourrait aller en congé de maternité. Ou Véronique a des enfants. Les enfants vont avoir la fièvre un jour. Elle ne pourra pas venir. Et nous, en tant que CIDI, en tant que ce genre de poste-là, ce n'est pas fait pour elle. Il faut que ce soit toujours, elle soit secondée ou elle soit la seconde d'un homme. Vous comprenez? C'est-à-dire, il y a un homme qui est toujours devant et la femme libre. Et tout simplement, tout ça, ce sont les normes sociales qui disent que les femmes doivent être toujours derrière les hommes. Ce qui n'est pas vrai. Je dis aux gens toujours, la femme est à côté de l'homme. C'est un partenariat gagnant-gagnant. Si vous voulez que le monde marche, vous êtes obligé de tenir compte de la totalité du ciel. La femme est la moitié du ciel. Et on ne peut pas faire un développement harmonieux si la moitié du ciel est laissée sur le bord de la route. Alors, tous ces aspects-là, et ça se ressent même aussi, tous ces éléments de discrimination, de protection sociale, mais vont se retrouver même dans la prise en charge des cas d'agression sexuelle, de violence sexuelle et de harcèlement sexuel que les femmes subissent. Vous savez, quand j'étais sur le terrain, une fois, il y a une de mes collègues pour emboîter le pas à mes amis qui disait que oui, quelquefois dans le cas du harcèlement sexuel, on a l'impression que c'est le terrain qui n'applique pas les directives du siège. C'est pas vrai. C'est pas vrai. Puisque c'est un club d'hommes, ça commence au niveau du siège. Alors, je vous raconte un peu ce qui m'est arrivé. J'arrive, j'étais sur un terrain et c'était très difficile avec le country director. On était toujours en clash parce que moi, je ne laisse pas passer les choses. Et quelqu'un est venu du siège, c'est une dame. Et elle me dit, je vais démissionner lorsque je vais rentrer. Et je lui demande par curiosité, pourquoi est-ce que tu veux démissionner? Elle me dit, cette organisation n'est pas faite pour encourager les femmes. Cette organisation ne soutient pas ne fait pas la promotion de la femme. On a un programme de lutte contre les violences basées sur le genre. C'est juste pour récolter les fonds. Et elle me partage l'information selon laquelle une expatriée avait été violée par un collègue expatrié dans un guest house. Et ce collègue-là, il a expliqué que cette dame l'avait provoqué entre griffes. Donc, il n'a pas pu se contrôler la nuit. Et j'ai demandé elle a rapporté qu'est-ce que le siège a fait. Mais le siège a négligé ça, évidemment. Et vous savez, quelquefois, il y a des choses qui se passent, on ne comprend pas. Donc, le siège écrit un mail à l'agresseur et malheureusement, malencontreusement, il y a le mail de la victime qui se met dedans, ils ne se rendent pas compte et ils écrivent au monsieur pour lui dire, écoute, elle nous a rapporté ça, elle fait beaucoup de bruit, donc pour la contenter, on va faire semblant de te mettre en congé provisoire de 3 mois. Quand tout ça va se tasser, tu vas revenir. Ça, c'est venu du siège, ce n'est pas venu du terrain. Quand elle m'a rapporté cela, je vous assure que le stress a pris une autre dimension sur ce terrain. J'ai commencé à ne plus sortir la nuit parce que dans le guest, il n'y a pas de guest des femmes, il n'y a pas de guest d'hommes. De guest house d'hommes, de guest house des femmes. On vit tous ensemble. Moi, j'ai arrêté de sortir la nuit pour aller aux toilettes. J'ai acheté un petit seau et la nuit, je mettais les couvercles de casserole là sur ma porte parce que si quelqu'un touche, ça va faire du bruit. Et je faisais pipi dans le seau et le matin, j'allais au vaisselle. Et j'ai fait toute ma carrière après sur le terrain. C'est comme ça que j'ai fonctionné jusqu'à ce qu'aujourd'hui, je vive au Canada. Donc, pour moi, cette question-là, c'est tellement vaste. La question des bénéfices sociaux, la discrimination qu'on retrouve, pour moi, c'est un système patriarcal qui est mis en place. Et le système patriarcal dans lequel nous vivons, malheureusement, est transféré dans le domaine humanitaire. Et comme au niveau du leadership, comme on dit, j'ai aimé l'expression de Anou lorsqu'elle disait, on a parlé de leadership des femmes. Elle a dit un leadership féministe et je suis d'accord avec elle. C'est-à-dire un leadership qui tient compte que les femmes est un être qui a des droits et des devoirs et que ces droits et devoirs-là doivent être protégés et qu'on n'est pas en train de lutter l'inégalité ou l'égalité biologique entre l'homme et la femme, mais on parle en termes de droits ici. Il faut que le leadership féminin soit représentatif des besoins de la femme pour nous assurer que nous, on tisse une solidarité, un groupe de femmes pour soutenir le changement. Sinon, on va toujours être en train d'avoir ce genre de webinaire, on va avoir ce genre de panel, rien ne va changer après.
Veronique, thank you for that. You know, it's resonating with me that it just rings hollow, all these promises and even the work that we're all doing to achieve gender equality and to address violence against women and girls these systems don't have, you know, some of the basic social protections in place in reality. Thank you for sharing. I want to turn back to Dr. Anu because we lost you, we feel like, right at a pivotal moment. And I know we're reaching about 15 minutes to time, but we'd really love to hear from you.
Sorry about that. I was so worried the whole day that this was going to happen, and of course it did happen. The electricity just went out for a few minutes, so that's what happened. So I don't know where I stopped talking, but I think I'll just go back to the point that I was saying when the electricity went out, was just that when I raised the point, you know, to the organization some time later to look at the optics, you know, to say, just look at the optics. I was saying I'm very diplomatic, so I did it very diplomatically. And I said, look at the optics of this. It doesn't look very good. You know, you have all these northern white people at the top and at the global level. And then I said, you know, there are layers of race, class, and sex discrimination that go with that. It's not just about having northern-based people at the top. I was told to go to the HR department and to lay a report with them because this was clearly a personal issue. So you can see how unwilling the system is to look at itself. So the point I really want to make about the overarching issues is that we are sent in to transform a system that is untransformable because it's toxic from the foundation up. If we think of the system as a house, and if the foundation of this house, and I know you referred to it as a house, Kelly, when you said the discrimination is in the house. So if you think of it as a house, and if the foundations of this house are colonialism, capitalism, militarism, which have, and what they have in common is that they're hierarchical, they're exploitative, they're extractive, and they're deeply patriarchal systems. So this very deeply toxic foundation, which is toxic to everything that feminism stands for, instead of dismantling the house or finding ways to remove this toxic reformulations of the foundation, so we get neocolonialism, neoliberal capitalism, and continued militarism, if we don't dismantle that house, which is killing the people inside the house and the people they're supposed to be helping outside, we end up merely shifting the furniture around the house. We don't change anything when we shift the furniture and we leave the foundation intact. So it's a futile hope that this toxicity will stop and that we can help people inside or outside if we are not willing to actually dismantle it down to the roots. So working in a system that is inherently unequal, capitalism needs inequality to exist. We have to openly acknowledge that this aid industry actually has been put to the test now, and all that Harriett spoke about, that Fatou spoke about, actually what Fatou said about, you know, how people on the ground doing it without the aid. It's been done over and over in so many parts of the world. You know, people just get on with it and they do what needs to be done. COVID has shown us that nobody can go into those countries anymore, and all the countries are actually doing it. They're addressing their problems without the so-called northern experts, right? And the monetization, but what we're doing is we're monetizing transformation as well. It's a complete contradiction, and yes, that's what it is. It's another industry waiting to start up, the transformation industry. So I know it's a mammoth task, but it's not about us getting overwhelmed. It's about us seeing it clearly, acknowledging our role in sustaining it, and understanding that transformation is not just structural. It's also about you and I, the people in it, that need to shift our thinking and be vigilant about how we are being and what we are doing with this. How, when we talk about shifting power, when we talk about localization, when we talk about accountability, when we talk about women's leadership, all those wonderful things, it must not be instrumentalized to sustain the system, this iniquitous system. It must be done to transform it in a way where we can dismantle the parts that resist transformation and transform the parts that are willing to be transformed. So that was what I wanted to say. Thank you for letting me say it.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming back in and picking up where you left off. those of you who know me more recently, I now call myself a recovering humanitarian. Just because when I started to open my eyes to this system, I came into it later in life. It just didn't make a lot of sense. Thank you for that beautiful analogy. So just, we have about 12 minutes left, and we do have a hard, is that correct? Yeah, we have a hard stop because we will honor the time and honor all of your time. And so with that, we're going to move into our last question. I'll ask the panelists who are participating to be brief in their responses. And the Q&A is not going to happen, I don't believe, on this call, but please share your questions in the chat and share them in the post survey that's going to be coming out. So with that, this is the future. This final question is about how do we shift institutions from within and what's required to do so? Or based on what you just shared, Anu, is it possible? You know, and what would a more distinctly feminist approach to delivering aid look like? You know, if we could shake this snow globe and wake up tomorrow in a different world, what would we envision for a new way of doing this work? And so with that, I'll start with Fatou.
You see my eyes, I was like,
yeah.
oh.
I did.
Listen, my imagination is, for some reason, I've been disappointed enough, so I'm not very imaginative. I have very, but there are two things I would love to see happen. One, I would really love the Grand Bargain's localization process to just be called the decolonizing of humanitarian aid, period. Because that is what we're trying to do. Let's just call it decolonizing. Okay, and in that be intentional about shifting power. I think there's power in name. I'm totally with Anu. You can monetize anything and everything and co-opt it, but localization is one of these things wherein I would love to see the complete renaming, because then we can politicize it in a way that is required. And the other vision I have very quickly is it's a bit, this is a big vision, and also there are problems with it. You can poke holes with it, because I also don't believe that just because I'm a Black woman, I'm an African woman, I am the best suited person to then be in the sector. I think there are problems there as well based on my conditioning. But for me, it would be amazing to see a humanitarian sector where, from a feminist perspective, where it is women on the ground that are completely shifting, developing programming, part of the costing system, shaping policy, and that the humanitarian aid is just, forget diversity, it is women and women of color that are leading and are shaping and are pushing and are interrogating the space, so that when I go to the field, okay, I can see reflections of myself all over.
I think that was pretty visionary. Thank you for that. I'd love to call on Mendy to share her vision.
Great, thanks, Anu and Fatou, for that lead up. I mean, it's hard to, I totally feel you on the vision and getting, what is that new vision? And I really appreciate, Anu, you saying that, like, let's find those pieces that we can change, right? Let's find those parts of these big architectures that we can possibly shift. And and in a really big way, think about how we are helping the fighters who are still in those systems, right? We've all been there. We've all been fighting inside these big institutions. And I think it's so valuable. And I love that you pointed it out, that we have to keep, like, I need you to stick with it, Fatou, and I need all of us to be able to do it together, right? Because we need the good people inside of these systems, right? To find those pieces that we are able to change and shift. And I love the calling localization, decolonization of aid. It's about time that it would be called that, Fatou. So agree with that. I think at the same time, let's just respect women and girls as the experts that they are on their lives and their lived experience. Elevate what they know is needed, right? Keep calling out this bias and the cultures that really reward the sexism, the discrimination, that hide the abuse. We have to just keep calling it out. We have to keep figuring out how we get more women into the leadership roles, right? And we need women to stand in solidarity with each other, right? Anu, I want you to know that I'm behind you, right? And I know you're behind me, right? And like, let's get more women around the table so that there are more of our voices and more of our diverse voices that are saying what we know is necessary, right? And so we can get rid of this old boys network, right? There's a different way for us to be able to lead. We should not have to adapt our leadership practices to accommodate the majority of men that there still are in our space. We need more space, and we need to be able to lead the way that we should lead as women. And we know that women's organizations have been at the forefront of women's rights work, right? We know if they're supported, we know if they have increased access to capital, they're going to make decisions that are going to be life-changing for women and girls, but their entire communities and societies. So let's listen to them and let's get money in their hands, right? Let's get money in the hands of organizations that are also trying to do things differently and create that new vision for the world, rather than only trying to break down these existing patriarchal, hierarchical organizations. I'll stop.
Thank you, Mendy. And I'd love to turn to Harriett now.
For me, I would sum it up in three words, keywords. One, accountability. We need to hold people accountable for their actions, and we need to have an equal playground for both men and women, and recognizing the important role that women play in the humanitarian aid. Then two, involvement. Involve women more in key leadership positions, in making strategic decisions that are affecting women. And lastly, I'll talk about what Anu and Mendy and Fatou have spoken about, solidarity. Harriett Oyombe said, if you want to kill a snake, don't wound it, kill it. That we really dismantle these patriarchal systems and not shift the furniture, as Anu was saying, within the house, within the system. And we can do this if we are in solidarity with each other as women. Like, we are very intentional in supporting each other. Like, the men are very supportive to each other. We should be very intentional in supporting each other, in holding each other's hands and moving towards a better world where we can actually make decisions for ourselves. That is what I would love to see.
Thank you, Harriett. And now I'd love to call in Anu.
Thanks, Kelly, and thanks to everybody who, I echo everything that everyone said so far, particularly Fatou, who has really put forward the vision of the Feminist Humanitarian Network. And, so there's not much more I can add to that. I fully am behind that vision. I just want to say that coming back to the analogy about the furniture and the house, even if we stop shifting furniture and dismantle the house, it will get rebuilt, and probably more toxic than before, unless there's personal transformation that goes along with structural change. So it's not about victim blaming, but about acknowledging any tiny way that we contribute to sustaining the status quo, and constantly reflecting, growing with a willingness to see the role we're playing and how we might benefit from the dysfunction. So openness and honesty to look internally as well as externally, and to show up with integrity. That's what I would like to see, along with everything else that everyone has said. We need to commit to recognizing and addressing the power dynamics, not only in the system, but also within our own structures and within our own ways of working and ways of being. So for me, that's a really important parallel process that must go along with the structural change, as well as the societal change of behavior that we want to see in the world. So I'll stop there.
Thank you for that. Thank you. And finally, I would love to give the floor to Vera, and we have just a couple minutes until we wrap.
Merci. Je pense que les autres ont déjà dit beaucoup de choses. Juste ce que je vais ajouter, c'est pour moi, si on veut avoir notre vision, c'est d'avoir une vision féministe du monde. Mais il faut définir ce qu'on met dans féminisme. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, ce thème féminisme a été galvaudé, a été dénaturé au sens où, lorsqu'on parle de féminisme, tout le monde se braque parce qu'ils voient comme une sorte de combat de femmes contre les hommes. Ce n'est pas vrai. Pour nous, le féminisme, c'est de dire que la femme, en tant qu'être humain, a des droits et des obligations. C'est un acteur de développement qui doit pouvoir participer au développement de sa communauté en apportant sa sensibilité, son émotion, sa vision, sa capacité. Mais cela doit se faire dans un environnement qui est sécurisé, dans un environnement qui tient compte de cette spécificité de cette femme. Et la dernière chose, c'est d'avoir des politiques, vraiment des politiques au niveau des organisations qui ne sont pas des politiques juste pour satisfaire les bailleurs, mais des politiques qui sont pratiquées, qui sont fonctionnelles et qui tiennent compte aujourd'hui de la diversité du monde dont on parle. La diversité en tant que femme, diversité en tant que femme vivant avec un handicap, personnes âgées, femmes ayant des besoins spécifiques, les enfants, les filles, les hommes et tout ça, parce que c'est ensemble que nous pouvons bâtir un monde meilleur.
Thank you, Veronique. Thank you to everyone. We clearly need more time for this conversation, and there's more to come. We'll be following up, but just wanted to say a quick thank you on behalf of VOICE and the Arab Institute for Women for all of the panelists, for your time, for your candidness and sharing, for your ideas, and for all the participants listening in. It's the start of something beautiful, and I'm humbled and grateful to be here today. We'll be sending out a survey. It will be quick and brief, and we'd love your feedback. Thank you, and have a wonderful day, afternoon, evening.